Anyway, he came to me and said, hey, my dad's a billionaire. And so he's a millionaire just because he was born. And I want to give away my money.
Wow.
So he did come to me and just say, where do I write the checks?
What would you do if you were given $10 million with the only condition being you need to use the money to make a positive impact on the world? This is essentially what happened to Adrian Koehler. Adrian is a leadership engagement expert and founder of Take New Ground, a global executive coaching and training firm. He's trained and developed leaders at Nike, Navy SEALs, Oprah Winfrey Network, UCLA, and others. In this episode, we uncover how Adrian and his business partner overcame the odds of helping prisoners who, on average, have an 87% likelihood of returning to prison after being released, and once they go through their program, that number drops down to 8%. Adrian and his business partner Dan have cracked the code on helping people develop mindsets that put them back in the driver's seat, and the parallels discussed between prisoners and founders in this episode is uncanny. Not to mention, before all this, someone offered to write a $10 million check. It's wild. Let's get into it. We're going to dive right in, wasting no time.
Let's do it.
Here's what I know. You and your business partner, Dan, have spent a lot of time working with prisoners to help overcome their mindsets and shift their thinking so they can find freedom and a better way of living. I'm curious, what parallels do you see between the prisoners you've worked with and the founders you work with?
They're nearly the same person.
Wow.
In some ways only because humans are humans. So maybe for those that are listening, and a touch of context. So when you're saying we work with prisoners, yes, that's how I met Dan. Dan, I was running a foundation at the time. This was 12 years ago. Running a foundation at the time, we were doing work in the prison system and didn't know what to do. We knew that the guy that gave all the money wanted to do some reform type work. Long story short, I met a batch of lifers, and I met Dan Tacchini, who had been doing gang intervention work for decades and had created a program that was unparalleled in this space, meaning like the most studied program and the most pervasively used in the criminal justice system across the country.
Wow.
And have seen results. And really not, I was going to say the only thing that matters, the thing that matters most around if you want to make a difference in that world is what they call recidivism. Like when somebody gets out, are they going to come back? That's the question. Most guys that get out of prison come back. 87% of people that get out of prison come back. Now, why is that? We can get into that if you want. If after people go through this program that's called Ready for Life, the average is around 8% come back. So from 87% down to 8. What makes someone perpetrate again? That's what makes them come back, or they get caught again perpetrating, is how victimized they are. That is the key, is that life happens for us on a continuum, and our mindsets are on, there's lots of continuums, lots of ways to look at this, but this is the crux. The crux is if someone is responsible, or if they end up taking responsibility, which was the crux of our training with these lifers we worked with, all these had done some heinous stuff, usually 20 years before, by the time I met them.
Yeah.
If they've taken responsibility, like full responsibility, like if they're done with their excuses and done with their externalizing, it's because of the neighborhood I was from or the family I was brought up in or blah, 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 whatever the thing is. If they're willing to take full responsibility, and it would sound like this, because we always say, you want to be in prison. How do we know that? Because you're here.
Wow.
Reality tells us the truth. We've got our own story about reality, but reality tells us the truth. Now, if they take responsibility, they'll shift, and then they won't come back. If they stay victims, then they definitely will just go because if you've got a victim mindset, you'll go find a place to be abused. You go find a place to be disrespected. You go find a place to be disregarded. You go find a place to be fill in the blank. Anything negative, you will find a place because the brain goes and proves itself right. That's what the brain does. We're not like open vessels over here. We're actually, if we're mammals, which we all are, we are intentional beings. And we go out and our brains are most concerned with predictability in the world and helping solve for uncertainty. That's like number one agenda of the brain, is solving for uncertainty. Well, the way to solve for uncertainty is to go prove yourself right. And we all know this. I know this. I do this all the time. Because I've got a worldview. I'm a certain way. Nick's a certain way. The world's a certain way, blah, blah, blah. And it's not like I'm neutral out there in the world. I'm actually collecting evidence. We call this cognitive bias now. But we collect evidence to prove ourselves right. Victims do that. Now, to your question, that's pretty damn human. And if someone is either living a high stakes life of a criminal or living a high stakes life of an entrepreneur, the temptation is very high to feel really alone. If you feel really alone, you do things to protect yourself. And most entrepreneurs, it's even in the vernacular, and people give each other high fives and they say things like, it's really lonely at the top, isn't it? And they're like, oh, it is so lonely. And then here come all the sob stories about how lonely it is. Now, the loneliness isn't just something that happens. It is a situation that's crafted, in my experience, because I've done it, right? I've been really lonely. I've been very isolated, and I've acted criminally when I've done that way. I've betrayed people. I've lied to people. I've hidden from people. I've lied to myself. I've lots of betrayal when I feel lonely, because if I am at effect, or if I'm the victim of the situation, then I'm justified with doing whatever I need to do to cure this thing, because it's so bad and life shouldn't be this way. Damn it, So anybody that's at stake can tend to be our most primal selves, and the primal self is looking out for number one at the end of the day. So founders, people that are at stake running something, are normal, and I'm just saying gravity, the thinking in our brain, which we don't get a vote on, is survive, look good and feel good and be right, be in control.
Yeah.
So in that way, we're all the same. I mean, we have a joke in our company, we're all criminals, and some of us are just more arrestable than others.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very true. We're all guilty of something.
We're all, yes.
When you come into contact with these people that do have this victim mentality, I'm curious, are they aware of it? Are they self-aware that they're placing themselves as the victim? Or is that kind of part of the process, is until you figure this out and you see for yourself how you're believing, then that's when change happens?
Most of us aren't. Most of us aren't that aware, because it's that's what's curious about mindsets. And just for the listeners to know who's talking now. So yes, did work in prisons. Dan worked in prisons for a long time. As of 6 years ago, Dan and I came together and started running these leadership coaching and training business. And so we work with founders all day long and high scaling businesses. Mindsets are very funny, and they're beyond principles. They are contextual, right? So they're in some ways, it's kind of like a fish. It's like the fish, you could ask the fish, hey, how's the water today? And they're like, what?
Yeah.
So when you ask somebody to take a look at their victim mindset, they're not going to say, oh, yes, you know what? As a matter of fact, that is a victim mindset. No, they're going to say, this is the way the world is, man.
Yeah.
You don't know my story. You don't know what happened to me. You don't know how hard my life was. You don't know what I struggle with. Anyway, so I think it's pretty natural not to wonder about the stories we're living in. And just try to make the most of life. It tends to be, because life is hard, tends to be despairing. Kierkegaard's got this quote that always convicted me. He said, men find a level of despair that's tolerable and call that happiness. So it's like, life's this way, it's hard. The industry's hard. Living in LA is hard. Blah, blah, blah. Dating is hard. It's like we just love to double down on how quote unquote hard life is, instead of realizing, hold on, hard is a subjective analysis. Like it's an assertion about, or it's an assessment about what something is. And I actually go create my assessments. Because maybe life's hard, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's really easy. And maybe LA's tough. And maybe, one of the most famous one is, you live up in LA now. Oh, LA's so superficial. Well, is it? Sure, you can go prove that, and people prove that all day long. Like, oh, people here are so superficial. Go for it, man. Or people are dying to connect.
Right.
And are looking for a live person that looks them in the eye and wants to care about them. That's my experience. Is the most superficial person is just really wanting to have a real conversation. So anyway, it's hard for people, back to your question. No, most people, they don't see it, because they're living it. They are it. They are their mindset. And so it takes some boldness to generate space between myself and what I think about myself. Because I'm really busy thinking that what I think about myself is actually me.
It's perception is reality. It's as true as it gets.
Yeah, in our work we say, people react to the world the way the world occurs to them, which is perception is reality. Like, I react to what I think about what's happening. And I say, there's no vote. We don't have a vote on that. That's all that's happening. Like, we live in our perception. And you can people can battle me on that if they want. I'll point them to tons of brilliant research that just proves that to be true. I think it's the best news ever. Because if I'm unhappy with whatever, it's how I'm seeing what's happening. Then I can change my mind. But we're ego-driven people, and no, I'd rather be right and be miserable than actually have fulfillment.
We can shape the way we want our lives to be. So if it's 87%, most people fall back into their old ways, and then through this program, it's 8%. I'm wondering, with the correlation to entrepreneurs, I imagine by the time, maybe, I'm assuming here, by the time entrepreneurs get to you, they've done this repetitive cycle of some sort of bad behavior that they're trying to get out of, and now the breakthrough needs to happen so they don't fall back into it.
Right.
Give me some of the process that's involved in maybe breaking down the victim mindset, or maybe them having them shift. Is it questions? Is it guided sessions with you in some way? What's the catalyst that propels people to not fall back into their old bad habits?
Ayahuasca. Just kidding. Not ayahuasca. I mean, it might be helpful. I guess I've never done that before. First off, your premise is correct. Most people get to me when shit's hit the fan. And shit can hit the fan because there's trouble, or shit can hit the fan because they're just tired of being frustrated. You know, I can be ready to change because I'm just so tired of not getting what I want, right? There's like a heaven I want, figuratively speaking, and I just can't get there. So it's not bad. Or I might be in hell. Like those are the two worlds there, right? But a lot of people come to me because they're in hell, and it sucks, and it's broken, and they can't seem to get it fixed. So yes, your premise is correct. And almost all, if not 100% of the people that work with me are connected to somebody that's worked with me or worked with the firm, right? So it's almost all referral based. So somebody's complaining about something or up against something really hard, and they're sitting down and they're having a conversation with somebody that knows our work and has maybe done this work, and they said, hey, I got a guy.
Yeah. You're the guy.
Just you know, it's weird. It's weird to talk to a coach person, and coaches are stupid and blah, blah, blah. But just go talk to Adrian. He'll give you an hour of his time. On that initial conversation, I am listening deeper than they want me to, and I am challenging more than they want me to as well. So if in that initial conversation, which there's got to be, and this isn't for everybody, so I'll just speak from my own experience, because I am unapologetically a shot of whiskey when it comes to this work. Meaning instead of like a wine spritzer or something nice, or like a nice daiquiri or whatever. Like I'm just a shot of whiskey. And if they don't like that, that's cool. That's me. Yeah, that's me. We're going to get after it, you know, and we're going to go to the high dive and jump off or not. And if we don't want to, you don't want to do a high dive, no problem, man. There's lots of people that create lots of great baby pools or shallow ends to go like ease your way in. Most people that I work with want fast results. And so to get fast results, you got to really be willing to be honest. And it's hard to get a human being to honesty. It's just hard for us because there's reasons why we're not honest.
It's scary. We're going to be vulnerable. We're going to have to show some of ourselves.
Right on, man. And I'd rather look good. I'd rather hold back and back to Kierkegaard, I'd rather take the life that a moderate amount of honesty gives me instead of take the real risk. Like and I've got stories of this from my own life about things that I was doing that was ruining my life, and I stayed isolated for a long time. And I didn't want to deal with it. I didn't want to face the consequences, some of which I thought were going to be tragic, some of which were tragic. And once I was finally willing to face those things and be honest with myself, yes, I had to face consequences that I didn't want to face. And then, yes, I was more alive than I had ever been before. That's the paradox, is like death and life are right next to each other. And if you have the boldness and the courage, this is why somebody was asking me, I just got back from New York last night at 12:30 a.m. And one of the guys in the room asked me what the core of leadership is. I get these types of questions a lot. What's the core of leadership? And there's lots of answers to that type of question. It's like a 5-hour conversation, I say. But, you know, I think to have the right conversation, we need to like slow it down and really talk about, anyway. But I just said courage. Courage is the core of leadership. Because if you're willing to do that, which is to move forward despite adversity, and that's internal adversity, external adversity, then everything else comes with that. But like if I'm willing to throw myself at something, essentially willing to die in order to live, figuratively speaking, like willing to take a risk, then There's nothing I can't learn. There's no conversation too hard, no challenge I can't take on, no amount of adversity that's fine. I mean, any type of feedback you've got for me, Nick, I'm down for it, man. Oh, I'm a jerk? Great. Tell me more. That is true. I would agree. I'm arrogant? Yes, I am. Yes, I agree. Let's talk about it. I want to learn, man. I want to be connected to you, you know? Like, so if people are willing to stand in courage and be honest, to your point, then they really love this work. And to give up the stories, the victim story, that's all it is. It's not a situation. Like, we can all have been taken advantage of. We can all have been, betrayed. We can all have been not gotten the hand we wanted in life. That's all. Those are data points. Those are like facts. But we don't live in the facts. We live in our story about the facts. And so the victim mindset is a victim story. And it is a risk every time we decide to give up the rights and privileges of the victim story. Now, I say that because people that are in a victim story don't think there are rights and privileges to being the victim. And there are. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it so easily. Because we get to be safe, and we get to be justified, and we get to be protected, and we get to be the hurt one, and we get to be the hero of the story, and there's the villain over there, and we get all those things. Those are all very enticing, and it's like superiority, and it's attention, and it's justification for not living a heroic life, and I get to be really self-focused. I mean, these are all wonderful. It's like a nice warm bath. And responsibility feels like the cold plunge. I don't know if you do any of those things. We got a cold plunge downstairs. It is horrible to get in. And then you get in, you're like, okay, I didn't die. I'm alive.
It feels good in here.
Truth is like that. Truth is like horrible, and then it's enlivening. Like the old rabbi said, the truth shall set you free. Like, I believe that to be true. I know that's been true for me. To answer your question now, long preamble, what does it take? Systematically, what's it take? I'm essentially a mirror. Because I am odd in many ways. I believe that every experience I have is created. That I create whatever experience I have. I don't create every situation I have. I might have allowed it to happen, but I have created all my experiences. And I invite them to wonder why, because they've come to me with their story about what didn't work and why it's not working now, and usually complaining about people.
Yeah.
Like, the team is this, the team is that. And I'll say, well, I wonder why you like working with an incompetent team. Let's ask that question.
Yeah.
Because you're complaining about the incompetent team. I get it. How long has it been here? 4 years? Huh. Then I wonder why you like them.
Yeah.
And now, why do I ask that? Because you've tolerated them for 4 years. You could have fired them 3 years and 11 months ago, but you haven't.
Right.
So there must be something hidden, some hidden payoff to working with people that you're smarter than. Let's just talk about that. Like, no bad. Let's talk about it. And when they start to turn the prism a little bit, or start to argue against their story, it starts to loosen things up a little bit and realize that, there is a fresh perspective over here that is actually full of action and full of productive action instead of just survival action. This is productive action when actually my story is aligned with the future that I want, like playing to win instead of most victims. When I play the victim, when anybody plays the victim, the best shot they've got is not losing. They're playing not to lose because I've been hurt, I've been taken advantage of, whatever the sob story is, and I live my life trying to make sure that doesn't happen again. And that's playing not to lose. And we all have done, I've done that for sure.
Same.
That's very distinct way of being in the world than playing to win.
Yeah.
Playing to win might be, yes, I was betrayed, and here's what I learned about it. Yes, I was betrayed, and here's how I set it up. Yes, I was betrayed, and now I learned these questions to ask early. And now I'm wiser because of the betrayal, and it could be a really great asset to me. Even if I betrayed myself. Like, if I blew my own life up, and now I don't have to live in shame about it, I can own it. Now I'm free. Now I'm wiser. I'm smarter. I'm more resilient than ever. So to your question, I'm inviting them to listen to themselves deeper than they typically listen to themselves and wonder about where they are on their level of responsibility and try on being responsible, because that experience is very distinct from the soul-crushing experience of being a victim.
Man, I definitely can see all of those being true. I can see the comfort of being a victim because it feels safe and comfortable, and I don't have to change anything. And if I just keep telling myself the story, everything will be great. And I also like the framing of those questions that change perspective without saying, hey, you're doing this wrong. You're messing up and I'm going to tell you what to do. It's like, here's a question and let's see how you perceive it.
Yeah.
Something that I've heard you talk about that I thought was interesting too, which is kind of switching gears here, is leaders often have trouble creating breakthroughs for other people because they've rarely lived with a lack of ambition or drive or that can-do attitude, or they never had to learn that. So there's a disconnect in how they can communicate that to their teams and employees. Can you talk to me about that kind of disconnect and how it can be overcome?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about a client I was on the phone with this morning, and this is one of her bigger challenges. So we use this leadership assessment called the Harrison Assessment, which is brilliant, and I don't use any other assessments, and I won't get into why all that is, but the reason I bring it up here is when she took it, her number one trait, her favorite trait is taking initiative.
Wow.
And it's usually pretty high with most leaders because that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Takes initiative in this assessment means the willingness to take action on one's own. So she's so naturally independent that she spends a lot of time being frustrated with why other people aren't so independent. And she's frustrated all the time. She said, when I talked to her, by the way, I was thinking about her actually when you were asking the question, because I remember my first conversation with her, and I had that exact question. She had senior leadership turnover, and they'd all turned sideways and blah, blah, blah. And my conversation was, her name's Callie. Callie, why do you like that? Why do you like hiring smart people and firing them immediately? Let's talk about that. So my conversation with her even today, and she's brilliant, and she's doing very well in the market, with her was, with all these leaders, is you are usually unconsciously competent. This is the challenge for all of us. First off, number one human bias is that other people think the way I think.
Yeah.
Like, we don't get a vote on that. We just naturally think that. That's why we call people stupid. Well, why is that? Because they're not doing what, at least in our minds, what we would be doing. That's why when we talk about empathy, we rarely get to real empathy, because I'm always thinking about what would I do if I was in their shoes? That's not empathy, but we call that empathy. So we naturally think other people think like we think. And so when people don't do what we do, we skip the step of understanding they see the world distinctly from me. Because I've been seeing the world my way for a long time. And if you're a really great leader, and a lot of people I work with, they've been leading most of their lives, whether it was in Boy Scouts or now running big companies. To be subject to circumstances is really foreign to them. But then they meet with somebody on their team that said, oh, this initiative, there's lots of variables here, and we don't know how it's going to work. Well, a great leader, a really impactful leader, or a leader like Callie, for example, she knows that. Of course there's lots of variables. And whenever they come up, I'm going to take them on, and we're going to overcome them. No big deal. There's going to be pitfalls. Great. Bring it on. Like, they have a bring it on nature. And other people don't. And how, like, that makes sense, because if they did, they'd be running the company.
Right.
They're working for you because they don't do, or I'm so hesitant to say can't do. They just don't want to do, or it doesn't occur to them that it's worth it to do what you do on a daily basis as a leader. Why the challenge, I think, is in the so let me explain this for a second. There's unconscious incompetency. That's how we all begin doing whatever. Like, we suck at something and we don't know why we suck at it. And then we grow and we become consciously incompetent. Like, if I was, for whatever reason, thought pickleball. Like, I don't know the rules here. I'm not good at it. I'm blah, 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 but I know now. Now I know the rules, and I know why I suck at this and why blah, 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 blah. So we go from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence, and then we get better, and then we become consciously competent. And then if we do something long enough, then we become unconsciously competent. So I come up against this in my business all the time. I'm really good at getting clients. I'm the guy you sit next to on an airplane, and we're probably going to work together at the end.
Yeah.
I don't even know how.
Yeah.
I'm just good at that stuff. I love persuading people. I love fighting for people. I love having deep conversations. There's lots of components. I'm being a little bit glib, if that's the word. I'm being a little bit falsely humble to say I don't know how. No, I've had to pay attention over time, or I've had people around me that help me know what I do well because it is natural.
Yeah.
That side, like whether it comes out in sales or it comes out in any kind of persuading people, I like it and I'm good at it and it's a fun game. But when I'm bringing on new consultants, they're not as good at it. But there's lots of mindset differences, and and mindset will generate action. Like I work with this guy Dan Tacchini. He's been doing this work for over 40 years. And so I love it. He was with me in New York at that training. I love being around him because he sees things so differently than I do. And he makes choices I would never even think to make. And I can sit there and watch him make the choice. And I could study the choice, or I could wonder about the thinking that generated the choice. Because he saw something I didn't see, or was willing to go somewhere I wasn't willing to even go. So he had more courage than I did, so therefore he saw a vast array of possibilities that I didn't even see based on my own fear. So a lot of leaders are frustrated because people aren't doing what they would do, but they're not willing to codify or to be clear about how they think about things. And if they did that, like share the unconscious approach, make the unconscious conscious, and share it. That's what I just talked to Callie about. Why don't you pick a theme? Why don't you talk about personal responsibility as a theme in all your team meetings this month? Because for her, it's frustrating when people aren't being responsible. But she assumes other people want to be responsible, and they, based on results, aren't. So, yeah, that is a big challenge. And it all came out of, I remember when this idea hit me, because I was coaching a guy named Brian. Brian runs a company called Gavin DeBecker and Associates. It's the top tier security firm in the world. So they protect everybody. All the billionaires have them at their house, at their businesses or whatever. They're
Nice.
awesome.
Yeah.
Brian's phenomenal. And I said, Brian, what you do most naturally, you teach most poorly. And I think that's I think it's a fact because it's so natural. I don't even think to have to teach it because I think it's part of being human, but it's not. It's part of the way human.
Our own genetic makeup kind of gives us that special ability to do certain things, and we go through life
That's a part of
not
it.
recognizing it.
That's a part of it for sure. Part of it is genetics. Part of it is environment. And a big part of it is choice, I say. I mean, if I wanted to get good at anything, I could go get better at it for sure.
Right.
I wouldn't be great at lots of things, but I could get really good at it if I threw myself at it. But most people don't imagine that being a leader is something that they can get better at.
They think it's like a personality.
Well, yeah, or it's like, oh, that's not me. You know,
Interesting.
I'm not like that. I wasn't born like that. I don't think like that. I'm not gregarious, or I'm not assertive, or I'm not fill in the blank, whatever the excuse would be. And so they count themselves out, which I think just justifies them not taking risks. And I say no big deal. I mean, whatever. Everybody just gets to inherit the future that their choices produce. But, you know, most people don't see leadership as a phenomenon, which is how I see it. Leadership is happening
Yeah.
in the moment. Or it's not happening in the moment, because somebody can, quote unquote, be a leader and not be leading at all. So they're not really
That's
leading.
very true.
They're not really a leader.
Yes.
Or somebody can like not be a leader and step up in the moment and lead. And all of a sudden they're the leader, even though they don't have any, because they're leading. Like it's happening. Like leadership is like a gerund in that way. It's like it's a verb. It's happening. And it's something on the move. So most people don't think leadership is something that even can be studied and be watched, like in themselves.
Man, I love all of those thoughts. It definitely can be a trait to be picked up. I think some of the best leaders in the world aren't gregarious and assertive and overbearing. I think there's so many leaders that are being studied
Most of
today
the
that are
best
opposite.
leaders.
Yeah.
Right on.
Gentle, caring,
Yeah.
personal, intentional. I think those are words that come to mind for me.
Yeah. I mean, culturally, things shift over time, right? I mean, we came out of, if you looked at management books in like whenever we started studying management, like 60s, 70s, 80s, if you looked at like, use the Myers-Briggs as an example,
Yeah.
most leaders were ENTJs. And most business school was about being an extrovert and about, being big picture, having a vision, being objective, making decisions based on data. And then J, being really tied up and like, here's results and here's the what by when and here's like everything's tied up, and that was the template. And now in this world, especially as new generations come into the workforce, we have to be connected. Being connected is such like a core, sometimes unspoken, a hopefully more spoken tenet of what it means to be a leader, like especially in the younger generations. Like if people don't feel like you care about them, they're not going to follow you because people are not loyal to jobs anymore. They're loyal to people. So, anyway, to your point, and there's a great book that came to mind called Quiet. Have you ever heard of this book?
No. Lay it on me.
I read it, I don't know, 10 years ago or whatever. Did I say new? Anyway, it's about 10 years old now, but it's really around the power of introversion.
Tell me about the power. I want to know. Now I'm curious. You got me hooked on the book. Tell me about the power of introversion. Because for my Myers-Briggs, I'll tell you mine. Mine's INTJ.
Yeah.
Well, I teeter between E and the I, but I lean more toward the INTJ side.
I get it, man. I get it. Well, it's a lot of things you said, right? Introverts. Like, what is the distinction? Is introverts usually go deeper than extroverts. They ask more questions than extroverts. They're more thoughtful. I'm doing big statements here, but they're usually more thoughtful. They're more reflective. They are more self-conscious, like they're conscious of themselves. And a lot of times introverts will host the meeting, host the conversation, and have really thoughtful analysis on the back end. They might not have it in the moment. But give them a day. They've really thought about it. They keep thinking about it when they get by themselves at night, or when they're eating lunch by themselves, or whatever they're doing to kind of recharge themselves. They are really thoughtful, and that's really powerful. Anyway, it champions that all the art of what's going on in between somebody's ears and in somebody's heart versus what's naturally coming out of their mouth, and we have to do both. But yeah, it's worth celebrating the other types of leaders. So if people are listening, it's not about who you need to be to lead. It's about fully expressing yourself. And whatever that is, if you're naturally introverted, great, own that. And don't hold that to yourself. Express that in the right ways that work for you. So that it's sustainable for you, but you're going to end up attracting people that are probably very much like you, which is really great, and that's good. And then also diversify, because you're probably going to need people that are maybe the other side of the spectrum, whatever that is. Like I always think about really sharp people with very well-rounded teams. I think that's the goal. Otherwise, we'd get burned out. If we try to be everything for everybody, that's not going to work, and you're going to run out of gas, and you're going to feel like a fraud because you are being a fraud. You're not just owning your thing.
Yeah, everybody's got their weaknesses that need other people to come in and use their strengths where we're weak.
Right on.
I'm going to hit you with a question that has absolutely no segue.
Do it.
This seems like a fascinating story to me, and I want more information on it. So there's a person named Jesse, and if I'm not mistaken, Jesse's father was a billionaire who owned a big equity firm, and Jesse wanted to give all of his money away, and you took him around the world to find context in how he'd want to do that, and he ended up choosing people who wanted or needed a second chance at life, similar to like Homeboy Industries-esque. Tell me how this relationship formed and what the process looked like traveling the world with him.
Yeah, okay. Well, yes, you've got all the raw materials there. So
Sweet.
Yeah, so I've had an odd career. I'll just give it all the context here. So I was pre-med guy in college and thought, I actually don't want to be a doctor. Let me go be a nurse. So I actually was a nurse. I worked in intensive care stuff, and that was fine. I just didn't want to do it in Chicago. Yes, you've done your research. Appreciate that. Lived in Chicago, and then moved out here because I wanted to because the faith has always been a big part of my background and really part of my future. Like I believe that anyway, that at least for me, my calling is to go help the world be reconciled. That's it. Order chaos, create beauty, reconcile the world. I don't think the world's by chance. I think there is a benevolent being, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I'm a God guy. I don't talk about it that often because people are weird about that. I'm not worried about that.
I'm good with it.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So I was working at a church out in LA. I came out, started working at a church called Mosaic.
Yep.
And we were, back then, we were very decentralized. We didn't have like a building. We were all over the place in high school gymnasiums and old folks' homes, rec centers and or rec rooms and at the Mayan Theater downtown, a salsa club, nightclub downtown. So the story is and I ran that venue. So I ran all the teams, all the volunteer teams, and I worked at Mosaic and I loved building teams and I loved to help people find purpose, blah, blah, blah. And because I was there all the time and I ran all the teams, I knew most people, and we would have 2 services, about 350 people a service. So about 700 people would come through, and I knew most people. And so I saw this guy walk in, and I noticed, and I'm a God guy, right? So I think when I notice stuff, there might be something going on here. Like it's like I'm not a coincidence fella. I'm like might be something meaningful here. So I noticed this guy walking in that I had a hunch was his first time. And anyway, I just noticed him. Night goes on, comes out afterwards. I see him afterwards, and I go up and say hi to him. And his name's Jesse. Great, sit down, talk to Jesse. Jesse, very interesting story. Jesse, he had zero contact with any church community ever. Jewish background. Yep, Jewish background. I may be confused in lots of different ways, figuring out stuff sexually in the midst of all this kind of transition in his life. And when he was in this big transition and kind of despair, he once had met a psychic in Paris, and he starts writing letters back and forth, mailing them to this psychic in Paris saying, hey, I'm trying to figure out my life. What do I do? And they went back and forth like pen pals for, I think, months, if not years.
Wow.
And finally, this lady said to him, hey, you need some friends. And you live in Los Angeles? There's this guy. His name's Erwin McManus. You should go find him. He lives in your city. Because he'd read all Erwin's books. And Erwin was my boss at the time. So anyway, that's what got him there. Is he'd been a psychic in Paris, had sent Jesse to Mosaic. Anyway, long story short, we had a big conversation about God, a big conversation about life, big conversation about what he wanted. In my faith background, that means making some decisions like, hey, there's things I want to turn from, things I want to turn towards. And it's always around service, and it's around giving your life up, thematically, giving your life up, the old self, and pursuing maybe a life that God wants for you, and there's love and 100% acceptance and all this kind of crazy stuff if you turn yourself towards God. So anyway, I just happened to be the guy that sat down with him at coffee the next day because I saw him after this church service. We had a conversation. Let's say, hey, let's get coffee. We had this whole conversation, heard the whole story. He says, yeah, I think God's real. I think I want to give my life to God. I said, da-da-da-da. I said, great. So let's do that. So baptize the next weekend at the ocean. That's what we do, like in the movies. To take God, let's symbolically represent a turnaround, man. This is great. So anyway, I just became his friend. And part of my work at Mosaic was majority of my work at Mosaic was I was the guy that mobilized people into the city to make a difference. So I built teams and sent them out to nonprofits and built teams and sent them globally and took teams all over the place and lots of amazing, fun stories of helping people make a difference with other people, which I think is the core of any religion that's worth anything. So I knew a bunch of people. And I had a huge network of people. And if you wanted to go, say you were into skateboarders that were left-handed, great. I probably know somebody that's into the left-handed skateboarders.
Nice.
Or whatever, and just being silly. Whatever you want to do, I probably know a guy that's into it. And I can help connect you. Anyway, he came to me and said, hey, my dad's a billionaire. And so he's a millionaire just because he was born. And I want to give away my money.
Wow.
And I said... So he did come to me and just say, where do I write the checks? And I said, no, we don't write checks. Not yet. Let's figure out what you want to do. Let's learn about money first off, and then let's go see what you care about, because I think there's a vision here for you. And you could either just try to do something to help you escape your guilt, or you could do something that's actually meaningful, that expresses life. Either escape death or express life. I say go after life. So let's take your time. So that's when I took him around the world, and we did huge trips everywhere. I mean, we did huge tour around Africa, and just people that I knew doing all different types of things. And I was on the search to help him find what he cared about. You know, what kind of suffering in the world might really connect with him, and he wanted to do something about it because we had lots of money in the bank that we could make a major dent on whatever we chose to do, but it needed to be what he cared about. So after traveling with UNICEF and going to several African countries and getting connected to many nonprofits, one of which was Homeboy Industries downtown in Los Angeles, Father Greg Boyle. If people don't know Father Greg Boyle, check out Homeboy Industries. They're breathtaking, and they were revolutionary in this world, or like gang reduction world. They're the best in the country. And we gave our initial gift to put Homeboy Industries in City Hall. And so there's a Homeboy diner right a floor below the mayor's office, which I just think is awesome. So it's like guys that have come out of gangs are now serving coffee to the mayor. I think it's great. That's
cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, that's when I met some Catholic people, these nuns that were going into prison. Catholics they have a whole philosophy around restorative justice. And so it was beautiful. Followed them in, got connected to these lifers. After Jesse met these guys, he really was compelled. I heard some cliche today. Let's see what it is. Your mistake becomes your mission, or something like that. That kind of quotes, it's cute like that. But it's like whatever our pain is, our struggle is, actually can be what we're meant to help other people out of the struggle. It's one way to think about your business, whatever you want to do vocationally. Like, what did you have to overcome? And then how can you help other people overcome the same thing? Because you overcome it, hopefully, or you're in a process of overcoming it. You can help other people that were you 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever that thing is. Anyway, he connected with these guys because he'd felt the despair of really having the whole world and having nothing at the same time. And feeling like there was a spiritual conversation he had just had with himself, like figuratively speaking, like from one of the parables Jesus taught, like what is it, the prodigal son, the guy that leaves the house of plenty and goes off to go find himself and ends up finding the end of himself and thinks, oh, maybe I could go back home. And so that kind of figurative thing, if it's like we can go out on our own and go try to sow our wild oats and do all that, but that's going to be, we all end up at some point, hopefully, finding out how empty that is and find out that relationships are the key of life, which we know from all the research and from lived experience. So he really wanted to help give a second chance to people who society had said are done because of the way they look or because of how they walk or how they talk or what they've done, so giving a second chance to the farthest and hardest, we would call them. And that's what we ended up doing. And all the prison work, that's how I met Dan Tacchini. And so we ended up working with lifers in prison. That's how we got connected to all the murderers.
Wow. That's amazing. I mean, that is a super
fun, man.
Fascinating story. How did you feel when it was just getting going? Because when he comes up to you and says, hey, man, I want to write a check for all this money, and then you started becoming part of this process, did you have some oh boy, now this is an undertaking I'm going to have to dedicate some time to, or some nervousness, some excitement? What's going through your head?
A lot of things were going through my head. Superficially, I got a raise, which was really nice.
That is nice.
Going from making $30,000 a year, living in 3 dudes in a 1-bedroom in the hood in LA just to make it. So it was good to actually make some decent money. Even more than that, I felt deep level of responsibility.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden now, who the hell am I? I don't know anything. But now I'm responsible for millions of dollars. And that's both frightening and very enticing to the ego at the same time. Now, so it's I was really...
Look at me.
Yeah. Well, people wanted to meet with me now. I used to have to beg to get meetings with people, but now I represent a whole bunch of money, and now everybody wants to meet with me because they want the money.
Wow.
But it feels like they want, it was interesting.
With you, yeah. Huh.
And ego tension. Yeah. But it's also thrilling because it's what I love to do the most, which is help people make a difference. That's always been a core value of mine, championing that, advocating for that. And so it was thrilling in that way. And it was also... I was leading, but it wasn't my mission. So there was tension there as well. It was his mission, and I was there to help him figure out what that was. And I might or might not have liked what it was. There's lots of things I could have done. If he was given just me the money, what would you have done? I probably, would have done lots of different things with it. Happy about what we ended up doing. So anyway, lots of tensions baked into that were both... challenging and thrilling simultaneously. I like the whole imposter syndrome. I know when people talk about that, I think all of us know what that feels like. But I definitely felt like that at the time because I was literally doing something I'd never done before. And when you're doing something you've never done before, at a huge scale. That's right. And I was 30 at the time, probably maybe 28. What year was that? Yeah, I was 29 when that happened. Yeah, it was thrilling and frightening. It was a great test.
And you came out on the other side. I'm sure there was also some weird gray area too of we're trying to hit this goal, but we really don't have an end goal defined yet. So we're gonna know when we hit it, instead of being once we find this thing, we got it. It's all in the gray.
Yeah, it was definitely like that. And Jesse, great dude, also hadn't really interacted with a whole bunch of humans. Either. He wasn't a trust fund kid that had the massive mansion and the parties and the Ferrari and the whatever. He wasn't that kind of trust fund kid. He had all the money, but he didn't do anything with it. He bought some real estate, but he lived in a cabin and he read Kierkegaard all day long. He was
What
like
a
a very
guy.
very philosophical guy. But so like dealing with humans is always really complex, especially if you haven't done it very much. So it was also kind of challenging in that way. It was very gray because helping try to move at a pace that was effective, but also trying not to outpace him. Like my aim was to serve him. So it's like you take time and hopefully lay out a couple steps at a time. We take a step, we take a look and see, and it is gray to your point. Like, let's find out what this thing is. It wasn't like, oh, here's the vision from day one. No, we had to go find it on the road, which is like thrilling, I think. But also there's a lot of tension baked into that.
Man, what a wild situation. I'm going to dive one layer deeper on this too, because I've heard you talk about, I mean, you've even mentioned it now, is like the impact in service needs to be there, especially around the religion context. And I also know that you've worked in some sort of activism capacity that was a little unorthodox, where people were being like sent into nightclubs and things like that. So tell me about that experience. I know that's kind of a vague piece of context, but how do you think the church should be involved in things like that?
Yesterday, when I was leaving the event, I was chatting with one of the sons. And the group we worked with yesterday was a father and a mother, and then they're 4 sons and their 2 son-in-laws, all from a Jewish context, from a religious perspective. And I was chatting with one of the sons as I was like leaving the hotel after we'd spent 2 days together in the room and done a bunch of work around their vision and their commitments and really their family dynamic and all the stuff. And I said to him what seems to be apropos for this moment in time. I said orthopraxy has always mattered as much or more than orthodoxy to me. Now that's kind of what a guy with a master's degree in theology would say. What I mean is like faith in action matters as much or more to me than what I believe. And I've kind of always been that way. Like if you believe all the right stuff, quote unquote, right stuff, but you're a jerk, get out of here.
Yeah.
I don't care. Or if you believe all this stuff, and maybe you are pious, and maybe you are quote unquote pure, as if that's possible. But if you're pure, but you don't make a difference with anybody else, I think you're a waste. I think you're the opposite, because that's a distinction between. I was raised in the church, in a Christian church, small town, middle of nowhere, America, Illinois. I'd have been around all that, but then I rejected it as a teenager, like a good teenager would. And then I came back to it. Why did I come back to it? I ended up looking at all that stuff that I've been taught as a kid. I looked at it for myself. And one thing that I saw was that this Jesus guy, he ended up challenging religious people and loving broken people. And that's a little bit vernacular. But he ended up really being compassionate to people that knew they were broken and they felt it and they were on the outside of culture. Those were his people. And the religious people, the ones that thought they had it all right, those are the ones that, if you ever, for people that are listening to this and maybe you've checked out by now, but if you ever want to, Jesus was angry plenty of times in the story. And he was always, I think always, angry at religious people, like people that thought they were high and mighty. He called them vipers. He called them whitewashed tombs, like looking good, but they're dead on the inside, which is why they killed them at the end of the day. But I fell in love with that. I fell in love with that ethic that, hey, it's the brokenhearted that God wants to be close to. That's freaking great for a couple reasons. Why? I was brokenhearted. And I thought, oh, I don't have to get my shit together to get close to God. This is wonderful.
Yeah.
And that's fun. And that's meaningful to have that story. So I think religious folks in general, no matter what your religion is, if it's about posturing yourself as being a good person, it's just such a silly game. It's not useful, and it's deadening because we can't pull it off, and we know that. We know that we're both sinner and saint at the same time, but acting like I have my shit together all the time is just so inauthentic. I can't do it. And so that's why in my work with people, I don't talk about religion very much in my work at all, but I do share with some of the convictions like this. Jung did this. Let's explore our shadow side. The thing we don't want to see, the thing that we judge, that's usually, if we call it hugging the cactus. If I can hug that cactus and put my arms around that, arms around myself, what about myself do I not like? What about myself do I reject? Can I befriend that side of myself? That actually gives me confidence. most of this conversation and culture around confidence is, I want to feel a certain way. Can I please just feel a certain way? Like, can I feel the power of my strengths? Maybe. And I say, if I can befriend my weaknesses, that they're not a problem, that's not a character indictment. It's actually, can I befriend that side of me? That even if I did like behaviorally, like there's a side of me that wants to look good and I might not tell somebody the whole truth. If I can know that about myself, that I might people please or posture, and if I know I settle for being nice instead of being honest, I can see when I'm doing that, and instead of judging that side of myself, I can say, Adrian, what are you doing, man? Come on, love this person. Go be honest. And I can call myself back to the surface to go do what's needed to make it work. But if I'm busy judging myself, then I won't ever do that. And I'll go to work proving. So if I'm being nice instead of being honest, and you call me on it, and if I'm in shame about it, I'm going to get defensive. But if I know that I can people please, which I can easily people please, and if you call me on it, I can cop to it quickly and get back in the game. So anyway, all that stuff's true for me, but this is why I don't spend really much time at all talking with folks that want to be religious around me, because I'm just not that interested. And I find that people that live out of their heart are much more, I don't know, even more connected to God than someone that like might know all the volumes of Scripture, but don't live a lifestyle that's compelling and makes a difference with other people. That's what matters most to me.
It can quickly become self-serving and ego-driving. Adrian, we are rapidly approaching the final question of the podcast. We did it. Look at us.
Let's do it, man.
Making things happen.
Wow.
I know.
Flew by.
Blazing by. But before we do, I want to acknowledge you for all that you're doing. While I was doing research on you, I found it super refreshing, this relentless coaching framework of being honest and transparent. And I love a quote that you have where it's, because I believe in you, I don't believe you. So I'm going to push back on you. Kind of how we just talked right there, where you're going to be transparent. And then we can finally get to maybe some ugly stuff under here and make some change that's actually, long-term, impactful. And then, of course, that aligns with your mission of actually making impact through action. So I appreciate all that you're doing, Adrian. It was really fun chatting with you and really fun researching you.
Awesome, man. Well, I'm really honored by the conversation. Thank you, man, I do these a lot, and it's rare that I meet somebody that's listened in and whatever. I really feel like you get what I'm up to, man, and I appreciate that. And for all these people listening, thanks for listening. Thanks for making it through. And however I can be of assistance to you in the future or my firm, we're here for you. Just find me on social media or look at takenewground.com or listen to the Naked Leadership podcast or all the stuff we do. That's all the free stuff. And if you want to have a conversation, that's also free. Let's talk. Let's connect.
Absolutely. Those links will be in the show notes. The final question of the podcast is, what does it mean to live a fulfilling life?
Wow. How much time do we have? What does it mean? What does it mean to me? I won't wrap philosophical on this as much. Let me just share. What does it mean for me to live a fulfilling life is slowing down, picking an aim, pursuing that aim, knowing that I will fail pretty constantly, and the learning and the growth that happens between current reality and what I really want, and the relationships that can be built in that process, that's fulfilling to me. So going after something that's worth having, we call that a vision, and being transparent enough that other people actually get access to you, and you are a gift to them. They've opened up access to them, and you're there for that. That's fulfilling to me. And I think about that in the work context, think about that in the family context. That's all I really want, is to go after something worth having and doing it in a way that I feel seen, that I want to be seen, I want to be transparent, and I realize perfection is a foolish game, and just be myself, full self-expression. On the road to something that matters.
Awesome. I love it. Adrian, thanks for being on the show. Where can people say hi real quick? Throw it out there. The tags, the usernames, all that stuff. I know you mentioned it briefly, but let them have it.
Yeah, on Instagram, just go to adrian.k on Instagram. Just find me there. That's the easiest place to go.
Sweet. That will be in the show notes. Go say hi to Adrian. Adrian, thanks for being on the show.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. Bye.
That was the episode. You just listened to it. What would you have done with that $10 million? If you enjoyed this podcast, you'll love episode 79. It's all about how to find your passion and purpose with David Taylor Klaus. Thank you for tuning in. New uploads every Friday at 6 a.m. Bye.